This is the Listening Books Podcast. I'm Jessica Stone, and I wonder, do you ever feel like you spend more time on your phone than you really want to? This episode's guest wrote a book just for you. And me. Becca Caddy is a writer who likes to explore the human side of technology. And her book, Screen Time, is here to help us take back a bit more control over our digital lives. Well, Becca, I've been looking forward to our chat, partly because I'm in the middle of an experimental break from social media.
Interesting.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So part of my interest in screen time is very personal. And I know I'm far from the only person who feels the need to exert a bit more control over the way I spend my time and my attention. So I'm curious, what was it that brought you to this subject? Was it also personal?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I write about it quite a bit in the book, but I have always loved technology and been. See, there's a lot in the book around language use, and I was about to say a bit addicted. But there's a lot in the book around how I'm not sure that's the best word to use, but maybe we'll get to that a bit later. But yeah, I've always really loved technology and had, like a lot of people, a real love-hate relationship with it over the years. And I see all the ways in which it benefits me. And obviously, I'm a tech journalist. I can't quit using my phone or the internet or social media. But I do recognize ways in which it's distracting me, it's making me stressed, it's just eating up a lot of my time. And that's going back years and years, probably since the days of MySpace, so maybe when I was like 14. So yeah, it was a really personal book in many ways because I feel this kind of push and pull with technology. I don't personally feel like I can ever give it all up, maybe certain apps and platforms. But the more people I spoke to, the more I realized this is a really common problem. And I think a lot of people think it's all or nothing, right? It's
Yes.
either I use everything all the time or I have to get a dumb phone and take myself off all the apps. And I just really wanted to, both for myself and everyone else, find a way that felt a little bit more balanced, a little bit in between.
Yeah. I think people are going to be very encouraged to find that that's not what you're advocating, that all or nothing approach. And that's why I sort of framed my break from social media as it's an experimental break. And it's partly you talk a lot about awareness in the book. And it is partly because I wanted to be a bit more aware about how I was spending my time. So I wanted to see what I would be doing if I didn't immediately revert to checking my social media apps.
Yeah, and I think that is a huge part of it, because there are a lot of studies that show a lot of us overestimate the amount of time we're on our phones and a lot of us underestimate. So it kind of just shows that we don't really know how long we're spending on our phones. We don't know exactly what we're doing in specific apps. You might think you spend all your time on email, but it's actually all your time on TikTok, things like that. But also, it's a good point you make about awareness, because it's not just kind of time goes here, time goes there. It's around mood as well. So just one example would be, am I waking up every morning and feeling a bit grumpy and stressed because I didn't sleep well? Or is it because I'm opening Twitter every day? And, maybe it is the first one. Maybe it is to do with sleep and people are blaming Twitter. Maybe it's the other way around. So I think your approach there to just kind of get curious about it is really a really good strategy.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, I've picked up some more strategies from the book that I'm keen to implement.
Great.
But you mentioned there about like how much you had to be careful with your words, with how you were describing things in the book. And actually, that was something that really struck me, was how many boundaries and definitions you had to be quite precise about. How I'm just wondering, was that a big challenge to navigate? Because there's words like technology, like addiction, that you spend a good deal of time saying why we should be really careful using that word, especially in relation to the internet, which on its own is so broad. And, screens. Well, which screens are we talking about? They're just because we spend so much of our lives on screens and online now, getting really specific about what we're talking about so that we can talk about it in any kind of meaningful way. That seems like it must have been a real challenge in the writing of it. Did that take up a lot of your time?
Yeah, it did. And so there's a lot of different reasons for that, really. Like, firstly, I did linguistics at uni. So I'm just a
Ah,
massive word nerd. So that's a big part of it. And often I think to make things accessible, I think a lot of the time, the way we talk about technology, the way we talk about ourselves and behavior, it can feel quite general. So we often say, I'm addicted to technology, right?
mm,
And so that's why a lot in the book, I do stop and pause and define things and get people to think about the words they're using, because I know many of us mean maybe like phones and laptops when we talk about technology. But what is technology? So I really wanted to get us to think about that, because I can't remember the exact definition I put in the book now, but I think I said something about it being a tool.
yeah.
And I think that's really important, because the way we talk about technology kind of taking over our lives and our minds, it's actually just a tool to help us do things. And
Mm,
that's not to say it isn't engineered to take up so much of our time. I'm very much not in the all tech is great and neutral camp. But at the same time, I think it is important to get really clear that it is a tool to help us do things. That means we can take a bit more control over it. And on another level, I'm very, for myself and other people, just very conscious of the way I talk about myself, my behavior, the world. I really do think impacts myself, my behavior in the world, right?
yeah.
Um, and that's not just, sometimes I'll say that in a way that I think sounds a little bit woo woo, but there are a lot of studies around kind of neuroplasticity and the fact that, what you say about yourself every day does end up impacting how you feel about yourself, which impacts your behaviors, which impacts your emotions. So I think things we might say very casually, like, oh, I'm addicted to my phone. I think I mentioned in the book, my phone's killing my concentration, like my brain is mush. Like, I think those words have power, especially, well, I don't know, I'm a very sensitive person, especially for me. I think if I say those things over and over again, I
Mm,
am cementing them to an extent. And I think we're all a bit different in that respect. So I wouldn't say it applies to everyone, but I think language is so, so important. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, you brought up something else that I wanted to touch on, which was um that you say in your introduction that you used to make the case that technology itself was inherently neutral and that it was only the way we use it that makes it good or bad. But you do say in your introduction that there is a way in which that case is getting harder to make. And you alluded a little to that about how it's being engineered. Can you say a little bit more about how some of the technology that we're using is kind of engineered from the outset against our
Mm,
best interests?
yeah. So I do make the point that technology is a tool and it's all about how we use it. But when something is made to be used, to be as kind of sticky and appealing as possible to make us want to be on there all the time. So there are all kinds of little things used, from like the colors, the language, the layout, the way you get notifications, the way I mention it in the book a lot, but the way that you can, if you want to and would have infinite amount of time, the way you could almost infinitely scroll, especially through something
Yes,
like TikTok, which just has an immense amount of videos. I don't know if you'd ever get to the bottom of it.
exactly.
Yeah. So there are all these little things at play to basically just take up so much of our time.
Yeah.
So, as much as some people may still argue that tech is quite neutral, it's a very I can't think of the specific phrase now, but it's a very a very manipulated game. So that's why it's so difficult to pull yourself away from it sometimes. And I
Yeah.
think it's really important to hold both of those things to be true, right? The fact that we have control here, it is a tool. You can pull yourself away from it, but it has been designed to make it ultra appealing, and it's getting more and more difficult. So I wouldn't say, at all that we have no control, and we can't better manage our time. But I think it's good to acknowledge that there are reasons it's difficult. It is not just to do with, say, your lack of willpower or the fact that you don't get on with work. And I think, I'm very pro kind of not judging ourselves in that respect.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, you brought up the importance of our own feelings about our online activity in relation to gaming, which I think some people might be surprised to find out what the potential benefits of gaming are, because I think gaming got somewhere along the way got kind of a bad reputation, and I don't know if it still carries that, or if we've by and large dispensed with it. But I wonder if you could say a little bit about the benefits that people have experienced from gaming, and then like how your feelings about it can actually affect whether or not you receive those benefits.
Yeah, so I was really surprised by some of the research about gaming as well, to be honest. And there aren't loads of studies, but there are quite a few studies now to suggest that it can have a real stress relieving benefit for a lot of people. And I think the key there is for a lot of people. It's not all people. This is all really, really subjective. Um, but yeah, I think in one particular study, among the people who kind of considered themselves gamers, they were experiencing the same benefits as another group who meditated.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, which seems crazy because that actually applied to a lot of different games as well. We're not just talking kind of like calming color matching games. We're also talking like what some would consider quite violent first person shooter games.
Yeah.
So I find that really, really fascinating, and that's why I think it's really important that maybe what one person finds stress relieving won't be the same for another person, but we need to understand that, especially maybe like parents and kids. Just because a parent doesn't find a game particularly interesting or good for them doesn't mean that their child might. So I think that's really interesting. I guess it's also worth pointing out that it doesn't work in the same way, but a lot of games are designed to take up a lot of our time as well, right?
Right.
So that is worth thinking about. And I think the problem with not only gaming but so much of social media is when the time and the use feels really huge, like it's taking up huge parts of people's days. And a lot of the kind of research from a couple of years ago really did suggest that any kind of negative that we consider when it comes to gaming or social media, it's when it's taking up vast amounts of time. So that might apply to some of us and to some people who consider themselves gamers, but often it's the amount that we're using it isn't quite as bad as we'd think when it comes to some of the kind of mental health and stress. But I think definitely with some of the social media stuff as well, so much of the negative feelings are around perception and how you perceive your time online. And if you actually enjoy it and feel like you're getting something from it, even if you spend the same amount of time as someone else, you will feel differently after, and your kind of self-report after will be different.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're constantly kind of shaming yourself for, why am I doing this? Oh God, I spend so much time online. The self-report there will be much more negative, which I guess when you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. But it's that idea that not all time online is spent equal, even if it's
Right.
like, yeah, even if it's just, even if we're both on Instagram doing the same kind of thing. If I'm thinking, well, I'm here to learn how to, I can't think of an example, but like, I'm here to learn how to put eyeliner on. I actually want to be here scrolling through loads of makeup videos. I've been on here an hour, but like I'm learning loads and it's fun and I like it. But someone else might be like, why am I looking at this? I don't need to know this. It's fluffy. It's a waste of time. So I think there is so much around how you judge yourself
Yeah.
for what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. I also think you make the point about how engaged you are while you're doing the activities, which really makes sense for why the clear benefit shows up with gaming, because gaming is something that you have to kind of be fully engaged in, and you can reach that state of flow, but you can also be more or less engaged with other online activities as well. Like that, if you're on social media, for example, that you can be someone who is actively like commenting and engaging with other people, like using it to connect with people, or you can just be lurking, and that there is a difference in outcome and how you feel about and how people experience the benefits or lack
Yeah.
thereof.
Yeah. And I think we all kind of, if we maybe a little bit more aware, we all could probably kind of recognize that difference in states. I often
Yeah.
compare it to the idea that sometimes half an hour will have gone on Instagram and I'll have felt like I can't really remember it. And it's like I've been kind of sleepwalking through it. And then half an hour on, say, TikTok, which I'm actually quite pro TikTok at the
Yeah.
moment because the algorithm seems to show me just stuff that I love
Me
about
too.
makeup and space. Yeah, makeup, space, travel, technology. It feels very good, which has pros and cons because it means I never leave. But I do think a lot of the time I'm having spent time on TikTok and I'm thinking, well, I know where I want to travel to next. I
Yeah.
learned this, I learned that. I'm definitely not saying that there are no negatives to TikTok, but I think there is a real difference from if you are actually taking things in and you feel awake. You don't feel like you slept walk through it. And the point you made as well about commenting, I think, is really good. There is a real difference between that kind of active and I think I call it in the book active and passive.
Yeah.
Um, like how active are you being? Are you learning things? Are you bookmarking things? Are you commenting? Or are you just, like sitting in front of the TV, but you haven't even chosen the channel, you
Right.
know? And personally for me, that's when I lose track of time in a negative way. And I leave feeling like, well, I've wasted time. I don't know what I've got from it. I feel a bit icky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can personally really notice the difference now, I think.
Yeah. You were saying, how a lot of the apps that we engage with, whether they're social media or games or whatever, they are kind of engineered to not have any real stopping point.
Mm,
there's no cue really to kind of prod you to sort of say, oh, maybe I've had enough now. It's just bottomless. But there are ways that we can kind of we can artificially impose some stopping points, and maybe even use technology to help us with that. Could you give some examples of ways that we could kind of impose some
mm.
external stopping points?
So most of the operating systems now have their own built-in settings. So the ones in Apple are called screen time, like the book. Um, and they're really great. They have limits that you can set for certain times on your phone. You can apply them to certain apps. You can add different ways of bypassing them so it can be easier or harder. Like some days I have restrictions on all my apps, but some days I'll actually be using them to research, or there'll be
Yeah.
something that I need to keep watching for because I'm genuinely interested. So sometimes I like to set it so that I can easily bypass them. Other people, if you can easily bypass them, they're like, I'm not gonna stop doing it. So there are more strict settings within screen time, but then there are also apps that you can get, like third-party apps that make it almost impossible to kind of penetrate those time limits. So you have to kind of play around and see what works for you. And even within the apps now, definitely TikTok and Instagram, they have their own settings that do a similar thing. They're not quite as comprehensive as maybe the screen time settings or the third party apps. So there's just certain time limits, but they do have them built in the app, which is quite nice because if you feel like, well, actually, I don't have a major problem other than TikTok, you can just go in TikTok and change those settings.
Yeah.
As I say, like these seem to work well for certain people and not others. So it is kind of about playing around with it and seeing what works for you. There isn't really a one size fits all approach with how they work. But I tend to set things. I live in a lot of 25-minute chunks. That's
Yeah.
how I do a lot of work
Oh,
and
the
how I
Pomodoro
manage
technique,
time.
right?
Yes, the Pomodoro technique. I mentioned that in the book because I love it.
Yeah, I use it.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, great. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think there's something about this 25-minute chunks of time that just works so well for me, knowing I'll get a small break after. And I divide up time on TikTok and Instagram and things that way as well, because it just works so well for me. And it means I don't have to think about anything. Everything is just 25 minutes at some point.
Actually,
So yeah.
maybe we could just. I know what it is because I use
Oh,
it. But
right.
maybe we could just stop and explain what the Pomodoro technique involves.
Yes. I've completely forgotten who first came up with it, but someone came up with this time management technique where you work for 25 minutes, you take a 5-minute break, you do that 4 times, and then you have a longer break. I can't remember what the official one is, but I usually take a 25-minute break then. I think it's maybe meant to be a bit longer, maybe an hour. And then you work in those kind of chunks throughout the day. And I find that 25 minutes is just perfect for me to get started, get into the flow of a task. And then I almost stop when I've still got steam. But I think there's something really powerful in that not stopping when you feel like, oh God, I'm desperate for a break. So what you get then with those 4 25 minutes is obviously just under 2 hours. And I like assigning a task to 2 hours. I just feel like that's a nice amount of time. So
Yeah.
throughout the day, I'll divide my day up like that. So I use that for work. I find that is really, really helpful. And then I will also set a lot of my TikTok and Instagram settings to 25 minutes, sometimes per day, sometimes not, because I just feel like that's a good amount of time as well to feel like I've rested, I've taken in some stuff, and that I can call it a day then. So it just really works well for me. And I know it doesn't work well for everyone, but I think it's worth trying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it strikes me like how much of this book is really relevant very broadly to our lives and not just to our use of technology because it really is about being more aware of how we want to spend our time and using tools to make sure that that we're able to live kind of in alignment with the life that we envision for ourselves, like the way that we want to spend our time and attention. So I think a lot of the good advice in here is good advice not just for tech, but for our lives in general.
That's really great to hear. Yeah, I like that. And I think, I think getting more intentional and aware about how we're living is really important. And also, I think, I think it's really important to mention as well that I really like dividing my days up by these 25 minutes. But knowing that I can do that, especially on a weekend or days off, I can choose to do the exact opposite. So I think
Yeah.
if you know that's how you work well, you know that rest then means a complete opposite of that. Because I think that's really, obviously, I mentioned balance so much in the book, but I think having that balance is important. Otherwise, your life is then too regimented, and everything is just in 25-minute chunks, and you can get a bit obsessed with that. But I think knowing, and even I even apply that to social media sometimes. I'm like, well, actually, I just want a break and I want to look at an hour of videos about where I'm going to travel to next. And I'm going to choose to do that. And that's going to feel good for me and restful. But
Mm-hmm.
at least I know it's a choice. So I really don't advocate for being so strict all the time, but just being aware enough to know when, oh, yeah, I am choosing to rest. And you know what? I want to do that right now. And I want to feel a bit mindless and passive while I'm looking at pictures of a beach.
Yeah.
Um, so I think as long as you're aware that that's what you're doing, that's actually fine.
Yeah. I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Becca Caddy. More to come, but I also wanted to let you know that there is a YouTube-only special episode of the podcast with author B.A. Paris about her psychological thriller, The Guest, and that's available on our YouTube channel. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Of all the advice that you researched and that you shared in your book, was there any technique that you found most transformative for you or most helpful for you in taking control of how you use technology?
I know it might sound a bit kind of nebulous, but it's the awareness. So
Yeah.
just turning on to some of these techniques, like realizing like, oh yeah, there isn't anything to stop me. Whereas say like in a book, there are chapters, I think just becoming aware of things like that. And I mention kind of getting hits of dopamine in the book, and how there's this thing called intermittent reinforcement, which is that, every time we log into an app, we don't know what's going to be there. Like there could be some notifications, there could be a new video from our favorite creator, there could be nothing. And learning that intermittent reinforcement, that kind of like, what's there going to be? I never know. Learning that is so, again, I don't like using the word addictive, but it's what gets us to keep going back. It's what's really appealing. Learning that is engineered doesn't always completely take the power away from it for me, but makes me think, okay, this is just me hunting for dopamine. Could I actually go do this instead? There is just some power in that. And even though I still get sucked into it often, it feels like I'm living a life that is much more deliberate and aware and intentional just by knowing it in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, you know what? We should talk about the audiobook.
Yes, yeah.
Which was beautifully read by Julie Maisey. Did you play any role in the casting or production of the audiobook?
I didn't. So I had an editor who, from the start, I was very lucky. We just clicked so incredibly well. She really got the tone that I wanted to capture with the book. She liked that we weren't going all or nothing with technology, which, there are a lot of great books out there that do go one way or the other. And I love some of them. They're really, really fantastic. But I was very keen not to do that for a lot of the reasons I've said, because that's just not my experience. And so it's very important for me to find an editor who really understood that, and she really did. So I think from the start, I just felt in a very safe pair of hands. So she made the decision to hire Julie, and I got to hear a lot of her samples. And, I always had the choice to say, like, let's try someone else. But I think my editor nailed so much of the book that she just was perfect as well. So even though I didn't play an active role in kind of casting for that, my editor did, and she was just as much a part of kind of making the book happen as me. So I was just really delighted with how that worked out.
Yeah, and that's interesting too, because I'm having an editor who gets the tone of the book and the spirit of the book, which, I mean, you would hope that of your editor. I mean, you would want to be on the same page. But I'm just thinking in terms of an audiobook, like tone really does, it comes across not just in the words, but how they're said as well. And I loved that your book doesn't have any kind of a scolding tone. There's no hands on hips, put down your phone kind of, it sounds like, again, with the having to be very careful around different boundaries and parameters, you are also navigating that line between alarmism and moral panic about how technology is taking over.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, sure, it's all inherently neutral. And so being able to walk that line between those two and give what I think, what is it? If it's not scolding, what it is empowering. That's the word I'm looking for. Empowering.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's a lovely tone to hit. So I think that carries across in the audiobook as well.
Great. I'm really glad, because I think I made the point in the book quite a few times that around how so much of what we see online as well, especially kind of news headlines, things like that, are very overly positive or overly negative to try and get us to click on things. And so I think writing a book about technology that was intentionally not either of those was quite, I wouldn't say it was challenging for me personally, because that is where I am in the middle. But I know, like I made the terrible author mistake of looking at Goodreads when it first came out, the reviews, and there was someone who put like, I like this book, but it was frustrating she didn't say if tech was good or bad, some version of that. I'm paraphrasing slightly, and it was like, okay, that was kind of like, I'm almost glad that they said that in a way because I think that really shows how much we want things to be amazing or terrible, this or that. And it's like,
Yes.
actually, in life, there is so much more nuance than that. And so I'm just really glad that you're saying that that came across a lot in both the book and in the way it's narrated as well. So that's great. Yeah.
Do you listen to audiobooks yourself?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Ah.
Some of my favorites. I'm a huge fan of Neil Gaiman,
Oh,
fantasy
yeah.
author. Yeah, and I love hearing him read his own books because his voice to me is just so incredibly soothing. And yeah, so I'd say some of Neil Gaiman's books are my favorites in terms of my favorite audiobooks.
That's quite rare as well, isn't it, for an author to read their own fiction books? You'd find that more often in nonfiction, but with fiction,
Yeah.
it's quite rare to have the author
Yes.
narrate. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And I think there's just some, I mean, there's so much magic to Neil Gaiman's writing anyway, but to the way he reads, it's so soothing. And what's strange is I'm not the kind of person who will tend to physically read books again and again, but I can listen to the audiobook of Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. I can listen to that a lot.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. And then in terms of nonfiction, I'm listening to Patrick Stewart's memoir, Make It So. And that's really great. And again, he's reading it. So, and it's about his life. And that is, yeah, I'm a huge fan of him. So that's very lovely to be listening to him talk about his life. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it strikes me as well, maybe because I do a lot of my reading is actually on my phone. And so where reading for a lot of people is a way to get away from screens, it kind of reinforces screen time for me. So audiobooks can be a really good way for me to put the phone down and get away from the screen, but still scratch that itch to have stories told to me. And
yes, me too. Yeah. I love that about audiobooks.
Yeah. I suppose I'd ask you if you have any recommendations for further resources once people have read the book. Are there particular apps or websites that you would recommend? I love that I'm like asking you to recommend technology for perhaps books.
So the things I'd recommend, I mention it quite a few times in the book, but the Waking Up app is a meditation app that I really like.
Okay.
And it's, what's the word? It's non-secular. So it doesn't feel very rooted in a particular kind of religion or spirituality. It's it's just very simple and easy to follow. And I really recommend that for people who have tried meditating before. If you're a complete beginner, Headspace is amazing. I know a lot of people know and use that already, but I'm a very big kind of proponent of meditation.
Yeah.
I really like the book Hello World by Hannah Fry. That goes into quite a lot of the AI and algorithm stuff in my book in much more depth. And I think it puts it in a way that makes some really technical and complex things quite accessible and easy to understand. And there are a lot of really, really good examples in there. So I'd really recommend that. What else? There's a book called Irresistible by Adam Alter that is very good, again, for kind of imagine maybe the concentration and focus and addiction chapters of my book, but again, in much more depth. So it's almost like if you want further reading in that respect, go and read Irresistible by Adam Alter. And that has a lot of examples of the ways that social media and tech is, designed to be irresistible. That's why it's called Irresistible. They're the main things that come to mind.
Wonderful. Well, Becca, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for sharing all of these tips and tricks and wisdom that you've gathered from your research. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really glad that some of it has helped you on your journey as well.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for listening. You can find out more about Becca Caddy on her website, beccacaddy.com. Screen Time is available at bookshops and libraries, and the audiobook, narrated by Julie Maisey, is available in the Listening Books collection. I'll be back next month with Louise Hare, author of The Canary Club Mysteries, which I highly recommend for fans of Agatha Christie, or really anyone who likes a bit of glamour with their cozy crime. We'll be talking about the second book in the series, Harlem After Midnight. I hope you'll join me again for that. This podcast is produced by Listening Books, a UK charity that provides an audiobook lending service reaching over 100,000 people with print impairments. It's simple to join. For more information, head to our website, www.listening-books.org.uk.